I saw her hand on his arm before I saw her face. My name is Drew. I'm 36. I teach 11th grade English and coach junior varsity baseball at a high school here in Chattanooga. And 8 years ago, I married a woman named Sabrina. That Thursday night, I walked into a bar downtown called The Dial to meet my brother Nate for a birthday drink I'd nearly forgotten about. And the first thing I saw when my eyes adjusted to the dim light was my wife's hand resting on a stranger's forearm like it belonged there. I want to back up, because I think context matters here, even though nothing about that moment felt like it needed context at the time. Sabrina and I met in our late 20s, both of us a little tired of the dating scene. Both of us relieved to find someone who didn't require constant maintenance to feel like a relationship. We got married on a humid Saturday in October, had the twins, Owen and Josie, 3 years later, and built the kind of life that looked, from a reasonable distance, entirely stable. I taught. She sold pharmaceuticals to clinics across 3 counties, which meant a lot of driving, a lot of client dinners, a lot of evenings I spent alone with the kids while she was out doing the work that, frankly, paid for most of our mortgage. I never resented that. I want to be clear about that, because it matters to what comes later. I was proud of her. I told people that, unprompted, the way you do when you actually mean it. My wife's the hardest working person I know. I believe that completely. Right up until the moment I stood in the doorway of a bar I'd walked into maybe 4 times in my life. Watching her laugh at something a man in a gray blazer had just said, her fingers still resting lightly on his sleeve like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't recognize him at first. It took a second, the lighting, the distance, the sheer impossibility of the scene registering as something real and not some trick of my exhausted brain after a long week of parent-teacher conferences. Then I placed him. Marcus. I'd met him once, maybe 18 months earlier, at a company holiday party Sabrina had dragged me to. Her regional manager, or something adjacent to that. Someone whose name came up occasionally in the offhand way work colleagues' names come up, threaded into sentences about quarterly numbers and territory overlaps that I'd never paid particularly close attention to. Nate hadn't arrived yet. I remember that detail clearly, because it meant I was standing there alone, a stranger in my own life, watching my wife exist in a version of herself I didn't recognize, looser, brighter, laughing with her head tilted back in a way I hadn't seen aimed at me in longer than I wanted to admit. I want to be honest about something before I go any further, because I think it's relevant to everything that happened after. I am not a confrontational person. I've spent most of my adult life being the calm one, the de-escalator, the guy who smooths things over before they become things. In my classroom, I'm good at reading a room, good at knowing when to let a tense moment breathe instead of forcing it into a reaction. I'd always considered that a strength. Standing in the doorway of the Dial that night, watching my wife's hand on another man's arm, I understood for the first time that it might also be the exact reason I hadn't seen this coming at all. I didn't storm over. I didn't call her name across the room. I stood there instead, for what felt like a very long time, and was probably closer to 20 seconds, just watching, cataloging details the way you catalog details in a dream you're trying to hold on to before it slips away. The particular way she leaned toward him, the drink in front of her that wasn't the drink she usually ordered, the fact that her wedding ring caught the light every time she gestured with that same hand that was resting on his sleeve. Then Marcus said something, and she laughed again, and reached up to tuck a piece of hair behind her ear in a gesture I knew as well as I knew my own name. And something in my chest went very quiet and very cold. The way a room goes quiet right before you understand a storm has already arrived, and you simply hadn't noticed the sky changing. I walked over. I didn't plan to. My legs just carried me there. The way they carry you toward things your mind hasn't fully caught up to yet. She saw me when I was maybe 6 feet away. I watched her face do something I'll never fully be able to describe. Recognition, then confusion, then a kind of dawning horror that moved across her features in real time, the color draining out of her in a matter of seconds. Drew. Her hand came off his arm like it had been burned. What are you? Nate's birthday, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected, almost conversational, which surprised me more than anything else that happened that night. He's meeting me here. Marcus had gone very still beside her, the particular stillness of a man doing rapid math on how much trouble he was actually in. I didn't say anything else. I reached down, slid my wedding ring off my finger, a motion so automatic I barely registered doing it. and set it on the bar top beside her drink, the one that wasn't her usual drink, in the exact spot where her hand had just been resting on a stranger's arm. Then I turned around and walked out, leaving my wife standing in a downtown bar with a man I'd met exactly once, a ring I'd worn for 8 years sitting on the counter between them, and no idea yet how much more there was still left for me to find out before this was anywhere close to over. I need to take you back a few months before that night at the Dial, because the bar wasn't where this actually started. It started, the way these things usually do, in something small and forgettable, a canceled dinner, a missed bedtime, the particular quiet that settles into a marriage when nobody notices it happening in real time. Sabrina's territory had expanded that spring. More clinics, more overlapping accounts with the regional office. More nights she came home well past the twins' bedtime, apologizing at the door with her heels already half off, exhausted in a way that seemed reasonable given the hours she was putting in. I didn't ask many questions. I told myself that was respect, that a marriage where you trusted your partner's account of her own long days was a healthier marriage than one where you demanded a play-by-play of every hour she wasn't home. I want to be honest, some part of that was true. Another part of it, I understand now, was that not asking was simply easier than asking, and I had spent years mistaking easier for healthier. Life with Owen and Josie had a rhythm that mostly ran on my end during that stretch. Pick up from kindergarten, dinner, baths, the particular chaos of getting 2 5-year-olds into pajamas without one of them deciding the whole operation was a personal insult. Sabrina would come home to a mostly quiet house, kids already down or close to it, and we'd sit at the kitchen table some nights, tired in parallel rather than tired together, trading the kind of small talk that fills a house, without saying much of anything real. "Rough one?" I'd ask, nodding at her bag still slung over her shoulder. "You have no idea," she'd say, and leave it there, and I'd leave it there too, because pressing felt like something other than trust, and trust was the thing I was proud of us having. My brother Nate mentioned, sometime that spring, that he'd run into Sabrina downtown on a weeknight, grabbing a late dinner. "Work thing," she said, and I remember not thinking twice about it. Nate and Sabrina got along well. It wasn't strange for them to cross paths. What I didn't understand at the time was that Nate had, without meaning to, become a kind of unwitting cover, someone whose casual, friendly mentions of seeing her around town read as entirely innocent, because he had no reason to think they were anything else. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever looked back at a small, offhand comment from someone you trusted completely and realized, much later, that it had actually been the first thread of something much bigger, you already know the particular kind of dread that comes with that realization. Sabrina's best friend, Priya, came by the house one Saturday that same spring to drop off a birthday present for Josie, and I caught her looking at Sabrina a certain way in the kitchen, not suspicious exactly, more like someone watching a friend walk toward an edge and not knowing how to say stop without sounding insane. "Everything good with you two?" I asked her, half joking, walking her out to her car. "Why wouldn't it be?" Priya said, a beat too fast, and got in without quite meeting my eyes. She told me, much later, what those weeks had actually looked like on her end. This is what she was carrying, though I had no idea at the time. I told Sabrina to stop it more than once. I remember sitting across from her at lunch, telling her she was going to blow up her whole life, and she just looked at me and said, "I know." Like that was supposed to be enough, like knowing something was wrong made it survivable to keep doing it anyway. I didn't tell Drew. I've spent a long time since then trying to figure out if that makes me a bad friend to him or a loyal one to her, and I still don't have an answer I actually believe. That's what she told me. At the time, all I had was a slightly too quick answer in a driveway, and a feeling I couldn't name yet. The following week, Sabrina came home smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine, something sharper, more expensive, could have been anyone's coat brushing against hers in a crowded restaurant, I told myself, and mostly believed it, because the alternative required a kind of vigilance I hadn't built into how I loved her. I noticed, too, that her phone had started living face down on the counter more often, screen angled slightly away from wherever I happened to be standing. She'd always kept it face up before, nothing hidden, the ordinary carelessness of two people who didn't think to hide things from each other. I filed the change away the way you file away a lot of small changes in a marriage, not consciously deciding it meant nothing, just not deciding it meant anything either. That June, at a company function I attended with her, the same one, it turned out later, where Marcus had first started paying attention to her the year before. I remember watching her work the room with an ease and confidence that genuinely impressed me. I remember feeling proud, standing near the bar with a beer I barely touched, watching my wife be good at something outside of our house, outside of our marriage, outside of the version of her I mostly got to see anymore between school pickups and bath time. I didn't know, standing there that June evening, that I was watching the edges of something already in motion, something that would take me another 5 months to fully understand, and that when I finally did understand it, it wouldn't be through a careful conversation or a quiet confession, but through the accident of a birthday drink I'd almost forgotten to show up for. The expense reports were the first thing that actually registered as strange, and even then, I almost missed them. I handle our joint finances. Always have, since before we got married. Back when Sabrina told me numbers made her anxious and I told her I didn't mind the spreadsheets. That July, going through a credit card statement for a shared account we rarely used, I noticed a charge from a bar downtown. Not the Dial yet. A different place, a rooftop lounge near the river, for $84, dated a Tuesday, when Sabrina had told me she was working late in Cleveland, 2 hours north. I didn't say anything about it. I told myself there was probably a simple explanation. A work dinner that had run over into drinks, a client she'd needed to entertain closer to home than she'd mentioned. I filed it away, the way I'd been filing things away for months without quite admitting to myself that I was building a folder. That same week, Owen asked me at dinner, apropos of nothing the way 5-year-olds ask things, "Why does mommy go to work at night sometimes?" I told him work was just busy right now. He seemed satisfied with that. I was less satisfied, sitting there with a fork halfway to my mouth, turning his question over long after he'd moved on to whether he could have more ketchup. I want to stop here for a second. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a man once some part of him has stopped asking questions out loud and started asking them silently instead, cataloging rather than confronting. Maybe you know that quiet. It doesn't feel like suspicion exactly. It feels almost like waiting for permission you haven't given yourself yet. Nate mentioned Sabrina again that August, this time with a little more specificity. Saw her car outside the Dial the other night. Didn't want to interrupt if she was working, figured I'd just wave next time. And something in the casual way he said it landed differently than his spring comment had. The Dial wasn't near her usual client territory. It wasn't near anything, really, except downtown nightlife that had nothing to do with pharmaceutical sales. I didn't ask her about it directly. Instead, I did something I'd never really done before in 8 years of marriage. I started paying attention on purpose, not the passive noticing I'd been doing for months, but real, deliberate attention, the kind of person gives something once they've stopped hoping it'll explain itself. I checked her calendar app, which we'd always shared for scheduling around the twins. I noticed a pattern of blocks labeled simply client on evenings that didn't correspond to any client dinners she'd ever described to me in detail. I noticed she'd started keeping her laptop closed and angled differently on the kitchen counter. Something new, something that hadn't been there before. She told me, later, about a night that month I knew nothing about at the time, a moment that mattered more than I understood. I almost told him. I remember sitting in my car outside our house, engine off, just staring at the porch light, and thinking, I could go in right now and end this before it becomes something I can't take back. I had my hand on the door handle. And then my phone buzzed, a text from Marcus, something stupid and small, just checking if I'd gotten home okay. And something about the fact that someone was thinking about whether I'd gotten home safe felt like more attention than I'd gotten from my own house in months. I put my hand back on the wheel instead of the door handle. I told myself there'd be a better night to end it. There's always a better night, until suddenly there isn't one left. That's what she told me, much later. At the time, I had no idea how close it had come to being over before I ever found out at all. That September, at Owen and Josie's kindergarten open house, Sabrina showed up 40 minutes late, hair slightly different than it had been that morning, apologizing breathlessly about a client call that had run long. I remember standing in a classroom full of construction paper self-portraits, watching her crouch down to hug Josie, and feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not suspicion exactly. More like the specific discomfort of watching someone perform a version of normal that didn't quite match up with the small, accumulating pile of things that weren't normal at all. Priya was there too, at the open house, and I caught her watching Sabrina with an expression I'd started to recognize by then. The look of someone carrying something heavier than they were letting on. "You've seemed a little off lately," I said to Priya, mostly making conversation, not expecting much. "Me?" She laughed, too bright. "I'm fine. Just tired. Aren't we all?" I let it go. 15 years. No. I catch myself. It had only been months, not years, though it felt longer by then. Later that same fall, I'd understand exactly what Priya had been carrying that day, and how close she'd come to telling me herself. The $84 charge from July wasn't the only one. By October, I'd found 4 more, all from bars or restaurants downtown, all on nights that didn't align with any story Sabrina had told me. I didn't confront her. I told myself I needed more before I said anything. The same lie careful, conflict-avoidant men tell themselves right up until the moment they finally can't tell it anymore. That Thursday in late October, Sabrina mentioned over breakfast that she had another late client dinner planned. Nothing unusual. She'd had a dozen of them that year. And I almost let it pass the way I'd let so many of them pass before. Almost. Instead, for reasons I couldn't fully explain even to myself, I texted Nate that morning and confirmed our long-delayed birthday drink for that same night. At a bar downtown I picked almost at random, one I'd never actually been to before. I didn't know it yet. Sitting at that breakfast table watching Sabrina check her phone with the same too-practiced casualness I'd started noticing everywhere. That the bar I'd picked at random that morning wasn't random to her at all, and that walking through its door that night would mean walking directly into the middle of everything I'd spent 5 months not letting myself fully see. I want to go back and fill in something I skipped, because it matters to understanding how I ended up standing in that doorway at the dial without any warning at all, how 5 months of small, accumulating signs somehow still didn't prepare me for the actual sight of it. After the 4th unexplained charge, I finally did something more deliberate than noticing. I pulled 6 months of statements from that shared account, laid them out on the kitchen table one night after Sabrina had gone to bed, and started building an actual timeline. Dates, amounts, locations, cross-referenced against the calendar blocks labeled simply client. 7 instances total, going back to June. All downtown. 4 of them at the dial specifically. I photographed the statements before returning them to the drawer where we kept old bills. The way you document evidence at a job site before a wall gets torn down and whatever's behind it disappears for good. That was the moment something in me shifted for good. Looking back now, I understand that everything before it, Nate's offhand comments, Priya's 2 quick answers, the cologne that wasn't mine, had already told me everything I needed to know. I just hadn't let myself add it up. The statements didn't break something new in me. They confirmed what I'd already quietly buried for months. I called the credit card company under the guise of disputing an unfamiliar charge, and the representative mentioned, helpfully and without any idea what she was actually telling me, that the account associated with several of those same-night charges at the dial belonged to a corporate expense card, Sabrina's company, filed under a manager's name I didn't recognize at first, then did. Marcus. Same last name I'd half remembered from a holiday party 18 months earlier. Now sitting in black and white on a printout I wasn't supposed to have requested. I didn't confront her. I want to be honest about why, because I think it says something true about who I was before that night at the bar. I told myself I needed to be certain, completely, undeniably certain, before I said a word, because I was terrified of being the kind of man who accused his wife of something and turned out to be wrong. I had spent years being good at exactly the wrong things, at keeping the peace, at not asking, at making everything look fine from the outside, even when nothing inside the house felt fine at all. I want to stop here for a second. There's a particular kind of silence a man carries when he already suspects the truth and still hasn't decided what he's willing to do about it. It doesn't feel like anger yet. It feels almost like grief that hasn't been given permission to begin. Nate mentioned the dial one more time that October, this time with a small addition that landed harder than anything he'd said before. Saw her in there again last week. Guy in a gray blazer with her. Didn't recognize him. Figured it was a work thing. Nate had no idea what he was handing me. He was simply telling me the truth as he understood it, the same way he'd been unknowingly telling me small pieces of the truth for months without either of us realizing what those pieces added up to. Priya called me the following week, the first time she'd ever called me directly in 8 years of knowing her, and there was a long pause on the line before she spoke. "Drew," she said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to not ask me how I know to ask it. Okay, is everything all right between you and Sabrina? I didn't answer right away. Why are you asking me that, Priya? Another pause, longer this time. No reason. I've just been worried about her. About both of you, honestly. She said it too fast, the way people talk when they're editing themselves in real time, choosing which parts of a truth belong to them and which parts belong to someone else's confession. If there's something I should know. There isn't, she said, and I heard, underneath the word, exactly how much she wanted that to be true and exactly how little she actually believed it herself. I have to go, Drew. Take care of yourself. She hung up before I could push further, and I stood in my kitchen holding a dead phone, understanding that everyone around me seemed to be carrying some version of what I now understood almost completely, and not one of them had been willing to be the one to say it to my face. I spent that week doing the quiet, methodical work of a man preparing for something he hadn't yet admitted he was preparing for. I pulled the last of the statements. I cross-referenced Marcus's name against Sabrina's work contacts, confirmed he was, in fact, a regional manager she reported to indirectly through overlapping accounts, someone with real influence over her territory, her numbers, her career, which explained a particular kind of complicated leverage I hadn't considered until I saw it laid out in front of me. I didn't plan anything for that Thursday. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. I wasn't orchestrating a confrontation, wasn't setting a trap. I simply texted Nate that morning, confirmed the birthday drink I'd nearly let slip past me entirely, and picked a bar almost at random from a list of downtown spots, because it was close to the school, and I figured Nate wouldn't mind either way. I didn't know, sending that text, that the bar I'd chosen without any real thought was the same bar sitting at the center of 4 of the 7 charges I'd already documented, and that walking through its door that evening wouldn't be the careful, controlled confrontation I might eventually have built toward, but something far more immediate, far less prepared, and far harder to walk back from once it had already happened in front of me. She caught up to me on the sidewalk outside the dial before I'd made it a full block. Drew. Her voice cracked on my name. Drew, wait, please. I stopped walking but didn't turn around right away. The streetlight above us buzzed faintly, and somewhere behind her I could hear the bar's door swing shut, cutting off the noise from inside. How long? I said, finally facing her. That's the only question I want answered right now. How long? Drew, it's not. Don't. I held up a hand. Not that sentence. I've had 5 months of that sentence in my head already. I want a number. She stood there, arms wrapped around herself against the October chill, mascara already starting to run. 6 months, she said. Since the spring. I laughed. It came out of me before I could stop it. Not cruel, not mockery, just shock finding the only exit available to it. A sound I didn't recognize as my own. She flinched hard at that, harder than she had at anything else. 6 months. I repeated, once I could talk again. 7 charges on a card I manage, Sabrina. 4 of them at that exact bar. Nate saw you in there twice and had no idea what he was actually telling me. Priya's known the whole time and couldn't look me in the eye at the open house. I kept my voice level, almost gentle, which I think frightened her more than shouting would have. You gave away something I spent 8 years trying to build with you. Not just trust. The version of you I actually thought I knew. Please don't do this, she said. And then she was in front of me, grabbing my hands before I could pull them back, dropping halfway to her knees on the sidewalk. Please, Drew, I'll end it right now. Tonight, I already told him it's over the second you walked in. Get up. I pulled my hands free gently. You're on a sidewalk outside a bar, Sabrina. Get up. Tell me what to do. Anything. I'll quit. I'll transfer territories. I'll never see him again. I'll go to counseling. I already know what I'm going to do. I looked down at her, still crouched on the concrete, and something in me that had been braced for rage all evening found, instead, only a kind of exhausted clarity. I've known for longer than tonight, if I'm honest. I just didn't want to be right. She finally stood, unsteady, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. I don't even know how to explain it to you, she said. I don't know if I can make you understand what it was. You don't have to explain it out here. I meant that. I wasn't being cruel. Some part of me even meant it kindly. Not on a sidewalk. A couple walked past us, laughing about something entirely unrelated, oblivious, the ordinary sound of someone else's untouched evening continuing on around us. Sabrina flinched at their laughter like it had been aimed at her. "Can I say it?" she asked. "All of it. Please. I need you to hear the whole thing, not just the number." I didn't answer right away. Then I nodded, once, because some part of me, the part that had spent 8 years being the calm one, the patient one, the man who let things breathe instead of forcing them into a reaction, still needed to hear it before I could let this become whatever it was going to become. "It started at that company thing in June, a year and a half ago," she said. "Not this June, the one before. Marcus asked me a question at that party nobody had asked me in years. He asked what I actually wanted for myself, not what the territory needed, not what the twins needed. What I wanted. I didn't even have a real answer, and that scared me more than anything he said after it. I told myself it was nothing for a long time. Just someone who noticed me. Then it became actual conversations, actual dinners that started as work and stopped being work somewhere I couldn't point to exactly. I told myself the first time it became something else that it didn't count if I never let it happen again. I actually believed that, Drew. I think I needed to. But then there was another time. And another. Every single time I told myself the same lie. This is the last one. And every time it got a little easier to believe it a little less. I started rearranging my whole schedule around it without admitting to myself that's what I was doing. Client dinners that weren't client dinners. I became someone who was genuinely good at lying to you. That should have terrified me more than it did. I couldn't look at the twins' drawings on the fridge some mornings. Owen made one in the spring, all 4 of us at the lake house, and I'd stand there with my coffee and not be able to look at it directly, because I knew what I'd done the night before, and he didn't know, and Josie didn't know, and you didn't know, and I was the only one carrying it. I tried to stop it once, back in August. Told him it was over. Her voice cracked on the word over, small and specific in a way that made it land harder than anything else she'd said. Lasted 9 days. I don't have a good excuse for going back. I just did. I loved you the whole time. I need you to know that was never not true. I just stopped feeling like myself somewhere inside loving you, and I went looking for her in exactly the wrong place, with exactly the wrong man. Someone who has actual power over my career, Drew, which makes this even worse than it already was, and I understood that the whole time and did it anyway. The street was quiet after that, just the hum of the streetlight and, somewhere distant, a car alarm going off and cutting out. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "It doesn't change what happens next. But thank you." She nodded, like she'd expected exactly that answer, like some part of her had already made peace with it before I ever said it out loud. I didn't know it yet, standing on that sidewalk with my ring sitting somewhere behind us on a bar top I hadn't gone back for. But the version of my life that started the next morning was going to look nothing like the one I'd left the house with that evening. And some of what came next would surprise me more than anything I'd learned that night. I moved into Nate's guest room the next morning. I didn't plan the timeline any more carefully than that. I packed a bag while Sabrina was still asleep on the couch where she'd landed sometime after midnight, and I was gone before the twins woke up for school. The divorce took 5 months. Tennessee doesn't require much drama when both people already know how it's going to end, and Sabrina didn't fight me on custody. We split it close to even, which felt right, since neither of us wanted Owen and Josie caught in the middle of something that was never their fault to begin with. I kept the house. She moved into an apartment closer to her territory, closer, though neither of us said it out loud, to a job she ended up leaving anyway. Marcus's company found out within 2 months, not through me, though I understand why people assume that's how these things usually go. Priya finally told Sabrina she couldn't keep carrying the secret without also carrying some responsibility for how it ended, and somewhere in that unraveling, an HR complaint from someone else on Marcus's team surfaced details about the expense account that had nothing to do with me at all. He was let go by spring. I heard, secondhand through Nate, that his own marriage didn't survive the fallout either. I used to think I'd want to know all of that in more detail than I actually did. When it happened, I found I mostly didn't care. It had already stopped being about him somewhere around that sidewalk outside the dial. Looking back now, I can name every place I should have asked the harder questions sooner. The cologne I explained away, the phone turned face down, Priya's too quick answer in the driveway that spring. Every one of those was a door I chose not to open. I used to think staying calm made me the reasonable one in our marriage. I understand now it just meant I stayed quiet for longer than I should have, mistaking my own silence for strength. I started coaching more that spring. Junior varsity baseball had always been something I did on the side, But that season, I found myself staying later at practice than I needed to, not to avoid an empty house exactly, just because being useful to a group of 14-year-olds trying to learn how to turn a double play was a kind of steadiness I actually needed. That's where I met Renee, one of the other coach's sisters, who'd started showing up to help with the scorebook because her nephew played shortstop, and she'd apparently decided somewhere along the way that she liked baseball more than she'd expected to. We didn't start anything that spring. I wasn't ready, and I think some part of me knew that even then. But we talked, most weeks, in the easy, unforced way you talk to someone who isn't asking anything of you yet. Owen asked me once, that summer, driving home from practice, whether I was sad about the divorce. I told him the truth, the simplified version a 5-year-old could actually hold on to. That some things break in a way you can't fix by trying harder, and that it wasn't his fault or Josie's fault. Not even a little. He thought about that for a while, staring out the window, and then asked if we could get ice cream. And I found myself smiling for what felt like the first time in months, genuinely, without having to work at it. I started sleeping through the night again sometime that summer. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Waking up without already replaying a conversation I hadn't had yet, without doing math in my head about statements and dates, and a name I'd once half remembered from a holiday party. Renee and I started actually dating that fall, slowly, carefully, in the particular way two people move when they've both learned something true about how easy it is to miss what's happening right in front of you. She asked me once, months in, if I was scared of it happening again. Trusting someone, not noticing something important. I think I'll always notice more now, I told her. I don't know if that's a gift or a wound. Probably both. I could have stayed angry longer than I did. For a while I was. But somewhere that year, I chose to set it down instead of carrying it forward into whatever came next, and that was the only kind of winning that ever actually mattered. I wasn't the same man who'd stood in that doorway at the dial, watching my wife's hand rest on a stranger's arm like it belonged there. I was quieter in a different way now, not the conflict-avoidant quiet I used to mistake for strength, but something steadier, a man who'd learned the difference between staying calm and staying silent. There's a moment, most Saturdays during the season, when I look up from the dugout and see Renee in the stands with the scorebook, Owen and Josie usually somewhere nearby arguing about who gets the good binoculars, and I don't feel like a man standing in the wreckage of something anymore. I just feel like a man standing in his own life, finally all the way present in it. That's my story. A ring left on a bar top, a phone kept face down for months, a scorebook that somehow became the start of something better. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. If any part of this hit close to home, tell me in the comments. I read every one, and I'd genuinely love to hear your story too. See you in the next one.